Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 166. But before we get into that, just a little catch up on the last couple issues. Last issue, of course, was a crazy what-if story that was about what if Swamp Thing's friend Chester, who was a hippie, became a right-wing cop. So that seemed to be just kind of a breather in between the main storyline that was going on. And it actually kind of makes more sense once we get into the beginning of this issue. But what had been going on in the Swamp Thing story previously was Swamp Thing has been going through all the different parliaments of the earth and becoming their champion. So he is currently the champion of the Parliament of Green, the Parliament of Stones, the Parliament of Vapors, and the Parliament of Waves. So all that's left is the Parliament of Flames. But as of yet, we haven't really seen what that parliament looks like or what their trials are going to be. Oh, and I should mention, in case you didn't know, this is the last arc of Volume 2 of Swamp Thing. So at issue 171, that is the end of this volume. That is when it officially got canceled. It went on a couple-year hiatus, and then it was rebooted into Volume 3, which begins with a new number 1 and everything. So I thought you should know that this volume is coming to an end. The podcast will not. We will continue into Volume 3 eventually. We will be taking a break for a bit because I got some plans for this podcast, but just wanted you guys to know that this is the last story arc, so be prepared for something epic to happen. And on that note, we got the cover for issue 166. We see Earth from the view of space in the background, and it looks like it's being overrun by vines. And on the bottom of this page, we see 3 men. One is the Phantom Stranger, the other is John Constantine, and we're not sure who the third man is. We also see on the cover that this is written by Mark Miller with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And we start off on the first page, and this is why I said the Chester issue kind of makes sense, because the first page of this issue is a full black page that just says 1 year later. So that Chester issue kind of acted like a buffer between the previous story arc and this new one, which is a time jump. So as we turn to the second page where we get the first panels of the issue, we get 2 really tall panels that show us at first the swamp, and then what looks like these Greek gardens with vines that are intertwining around all these different columns and archways, and it even looks like there are statues in this place. And there's some narration over these 2 panels, and it says, Day 1. The first question I am inclined to ask is why he bothered to build a new retreat for himself. Louisiana's sprawling bayous had been his home for many years, and never once, not even in those moments of deep depression, did he appear tired of its lush, extravagant beauty or bored of its natural wonders. Some believe he simply built this place because he was expecting guests. Those who witnessed the structure rise up from the quicklime and swamp water claim it took shape in a matter of minutes, a Garden of Eden landscaped by gigantic invisible hands. Overhead photographs suggest there are no stairs in the palace, no access to the thousands of rooms we can see on the upper levels, which poses a rather disturbing second question. What manner of guests does the swamp god expect to receive? Then we turn the page and we get 2 new panels. In the first one, we see a bunch of people that are half naked and they're feeding each other different types of fruits and vegetables from the garden. And the second panel has a giant statue of Swamp Thing in battle with Anton Arcane, and in this statue, Swamp Thing is stabbing the bug-like Anton Arcane, so the one that kind of looks like a spider and a fly mixed together, through the chest with a spear. And the narration continues. The extensive grounds outside his impressive new home have quickly attracted those who have seen the signs and believed the rumors. The ever-growing religious cult camps outside his kingdom. Believing mankind to be doomed, they feed on his hallucinogenic gardens and wait for the end. Others have brought their old and their sick, hoping they might be healed by this tangible new god. Trophies of the past are everywhere. Symbolic images sculpted in wood, stone, and possibly even air, in remembrance of his greatest battles. Some say this is proof that the swamp god has retired forever, a hermit living alone with no more interest in the world or its affairs. Others believe his greatest battle is yet to come. Then we turn the page and we get a full page splash of this new kingdom that Swamp Thing has built in the middle of the bayou. And it basically looks like 3 large globes that are sitting on top of each other. And there's all these spires and weird jut outs all over it. And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is Trial by Fire Part 1, Golden Days Before the End. Then we turn the page and we see a man talking into a tape recorder, and this is the man who was narrating over the last couple pages. And he is a middle-aged white man wearing all yellow. It almost looks like he's wearing a Dick Tracy uniform or something. And he's standing on a plateau overlooking this giant structure that Swamp Thing has made. And he continues to talk into the recorder saying, "The Swamp God has changed a great deal since we last met. His appearance is believed to be almost unrecognizable now, and his natural abilities extend far beyond the simple manipulation of plants and trees. Intelligence reports suggest his jurisdiction now applies to the air and water as well as earth. 75% of this world awaits his command, making him the single most powerful being on the planet. Verdict: military resources are unnecessary. Proceed alone, but with extreme caution. His palace is 20 miles east of the base, but the rough terrain suggests this will take 72 hours by foot. Once inside, our military strategists believe a further 2 days of intense climbing will be needed to reach the summit, where I hope to be granted an audience with our target. What has the Swamp God been plotting since his disappearance 12 months ago? Are the rumors of his corruption and his terrible plans for humanity accurate, or are they entirely without foundation? My search begins tomorrow. End of journal entry. Woodrue out." So in case you don't know, that is Jason Woodrue, who apparently is working for the government now. And he definitely sounds a lot less crazy than before, so good for him. And as Dr. Woodrue was finishing his last little bit on the tape, we saw the sun go down, so he decides to go back to camp. And as he walks into his trailer, we see a couple of guards who are playing cards with each other. And one of them says, "Jason Woodrue," he calls himself. "Dr. Jason Woodrue. Do you know what that sick freak's hiding under all that rubber makeup? Have you any idea what Uncle Sam struck a deal with here? This guy's a goddamn vegetable." And the other soldier replies, "Who cares? Maybe it takes a vegetable to catch a vegetable. I don't give a damn, and neither should you. The guy's gonna take on the Swamp Thing for us." But the first guard won't let it go, and he says, "The Floronic Man, they used to call him. He murdered a whole town once. I heard they threw his green ass in Arkham Asylum until some snotty kid lawyer got him out, and they let him join a super team. The Marines shouldn't be doing deals with no super criminals." And as he whispers that last line, we see Woodrue walk past them, and at first it looks like maybe he didn't hear the guy, but then he turns his head to the man who was talking and he says, "First of all, my lawyer was a 57-year-old Italian gentleman with a wonderful head of gray hair and a heart condition. Although, I fail to see how his age is of relevance here. Secondly, I did indeed slaughter a community, but this was an error on my part, a misreading of the facts, if you will. Rest assured, I have no plans to repeat my actions in the near future." And then he walks up the steps into his trailer, and he says, "I volunteered for this mission because I believe I am the only one the Swamp Thing will listen to in his present state, and I think I might ascertain whether our two species are in any danger from his plans. It is an act of self-preservation, nothing more." And as he closes the door on them, he's kind of peeking out and he says, "Don't wake me up in the morning, gentlemen. I won't be sleeping." Then we turn the page and we cut to a new area. We don't know exactly where, but there is a room and a table, and sitting at it is John Constantine lighting a cigarette with another gentleman. And the other gentleman is wearing a tuxedo with a top hat, so super fancy looking. And as John lights his cigarette, he says to the man, "So tell me, Timothy, how's tricks then?" And the man in the tuxedo looks up and says, "Your inane attempts at humor are becoming most tiresome, Constantine. Observe how I sit and absorb the silence as we wait for our host to arrive. You would do well to follow my example." And as Constantine sits down, he says, "Don't get all stroppy with me, mate. You're just a small-time supervillain these days. In fact, I read in the papers you robbed banks for drinking money." And Timothy fires back, "I'm warning you, Constantine. You know perfectly well the life of crime I was asked to follow was a direct order from the Grand Master of our lodge. Some of us refuse to question the roles we are assigned. Unlike others I could mention." And then John leans back in his chair very casually and he begins to blow smoke rings and he says, "Keep the noise down, sunshine. I'm trying to absorb all this lovely silence." And I had to look up who this Timothy guy was, and it's kind of funny because we've actually seen him before in the series, specifically in Volume 1. He is Timothy Ravenwind, the last of the Ravenwind witches. And the last time we saw him, he was a little boy who was kind of quiet and introverted, and he was being chased by a bunch of villagers in New England who thought his sister was a witch, but it turned out that it was in fact Timothy. And I guess since then, he's become like a small-time criminal. So as the two are waiting in silence, all of a sudden, a figure appears standing at the table next to them. John Constantine, Timothy Raven, the last of the Ravenwind witches. Thank you for coming on such short notice. And the man who has appeared is in fact the Phantom Stranger. And if you don't know what he looks like, he is a middle-aged white guy who wears a blue suit with a long blue coat and a blue fedora. And sometimes he has a mask over his eyes, but it looks like right now it's just kind of shadowed and his eyes are just completely white. And John, who doesn't seem very impressed, looks over at Phantom Stranger and says, "A cellar beneath a church, eh? Not exactly the sort of place I'd expect you to hold a meeting, stranger. All those holy statues upstairs must make you feel a bit homesick, old son." And then Timothy looks over at the Phantom Stranger and says, "Pay no attention to him, my friend. This mannerless oaf has no grasp of our mission's importance and no respect for authority. I recommend we proceed without the limited skills he has to offer." And the Phantom Stranger replies to Timothy, "Don't let him upset you. They say John Constantine's idiot comments are just his childish way of dealing with grim situations. He is not truly the fool he appears to be. As you are doubtless aware, Constantine also has a special significance in the task ahead. Our opposing lodge tricked him into helping the first Swamp Thing on his first step towards godhood, and now the situation has gone wildly out of control. Constantine is partly to blame for the Swamp Thing's current status and for his impending threat to destroy all we represent. It's only fair he should play a role in the last attempt to remedy the situation." And John just kind of yawns to himself. It's almost like they're talking about him like he's not in the room, but he's standing right there. And Timothy asks the stranger, "Is it true the traveler tricked him into helping conceive the Tefe creature, stranger?" And then John cuts in, "All right, don't rub it in. Any poor bugger can make a mistake." And in case you forgot what the Tefe creature is, that is Swamp Thing's daughter, who we haven't seen for a very long time. The last time we saw her, she was taken by Lady Jane into the Parliament of Trees to learn more about her powers. And in case you forgot, way back in Hellblazer number 7, and I believe the Rick Veitch run of Swamp Thing, in order to conceive Tefe, Swamp Thing took over John Constantine's body without his approval or consent, and proceeded to impregnate Abby so they could have a human child using John Constantine's seed. But of course, that didn't turn out as expected, and if you want to know all about that, you should definitely check out the Nancy Collins run, where Tefe got some interesting powers that she inherited from John having demon blood in his system at the time of conception. So in response to John saying everybody makes mistakes, the Phantom Stranger pulls out a letter and hands it to Timothy, and then he says to them very seriously, "A mistake which shall herald the end of everything if we're unsuccessful, John Constantine. Our allies are already positioning themselves for battle with the monster. Your own instructions are detailed here." And then he hands John a letter as well. And Timothy, who's already read his little bit, looks very shocked and says, "Invoking Anton Arcane? Tell me you aren't serious, stranger." And Stranger looks back very serious and says, "Consider those words and ask yourself one simple question, my friend. Have I ever been otherwise?" Then we cut to John, who's reading his letter, and as he finishes, he looks disgusted and he says, "Arcane's a bloody doodle next to my job. You know there's a lot of bad blood between me and El Senior Blake since that business in Hong Kong. Why don't me and Raven swap orders, eh?" And Phantom Stranger replies, "Impossible, Constantine. This assault upon the Swamp Thing has been carefully planned out to suit the abilities of the many people involved." And then John lights another cigarette and he says, "Oh, I get it. Everybody except you, right? Don't think people don't notice you never seem to get off your arse, mate. You always just show up and tell everybody else what to do. But when was the last time you got involved in anything dangerous?" And at that, the Phantom Stranger tips his hat like he's going to leave and he says, "Many opposing forces are working together to tackle the Swamp Thing and his child, Constantine. I, too, have a mission. I must journey to the world beyond the world and stand before the hooded man. It is my job to tell the word that the time has come for him to act." And at the mention of the word, John looks almost scared and he says, "Christ all bloody mighty, I take it back." And it almost looks like John Constantine and Timothy are looking at the Phantom Stranger with awe as he disappears. And just in case you don't remember, the word has actually showed up before in this run. Last time we saw him, He was playing cards with El Senior Blake, I believe, when Swamp Thing was in the middle of his trial of the Parliament of Stones. And we don't know much about him other than he is super powerful, and all the supernatural beings that are in this comic seem to be terrified of him. Then we turn the page and we cut to Jason Woodrue, and it is the next day, and he has begun his hike towards the Swamp Thing structure. And as he makes his way through the bayou, the narration says, Day 2. If our information is correct, what happened in Gotham City several years ago is nothing compared to what might lie ahead. The Cajun camp the Swamp Thing butchered here gave him a taste for blood and allowed him to see how cheap and worthless human life can be. His next kill will be easier. I know this from experience. U.S. intelligence sources suggest his attack upon humanity will not be single-handed. His missing half-elemental child has been trained in Patagonia for as yet an unknown purpose. One strain of thought holds that the Tefe creature was created to protect him from an emerging threat rising against him in the psychic realm. This is merely speculation, however. Those who negotiate in the shadows of the world are already gathering their forces, planning to launch an assault they cannot hope to win. They asked me for help to save this earth and everything which grows and feeds upon it. I suggested a more human approach. I suggested I try to talk to him. Then we cut to day 3 of his trek, and the closer he's getting to his destination, the weirder things are. We see a panel of a bunch of frogs jumping around him. Then we see Woodrue crossing a bridge that looks like it's made of water or some kind of liquid. Then he walks by a stone that looks like it has a lot of growths on it. And then he walks into what looks like a spooky kind of graveyard for trees. And over these panels, the narration says, Day 3. The swamps are enchanted, blessed with the rarefied air he has breathed into its darkest corners. One such place is Frog Hollow, a pretty name chosen by its intelligent, non-human inhabitants, who speak in rhyme and tell stories of the world which is to replace our own. A little further, I cross a shimmering bridge made of grape juice. As I watch the bubble-eyed glowfish swim in ornate, luminous lanterns around its edges, I realize why people chose to stay here in his gardens. I know why people worship him. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite so beautiful in my life. Many have settled here since the swamp god turned his back upon the world. Some number no more than 2 or 3, but others are smaller still. One such place is Ohm, no bigger than a coffee table, but with a population to rival the nearby district of Huma, an area which, coincidentally, has lost a number of its residents of late. Finally, I pass a silent place with no name and an atmosphere so empty that were I made of meat and bones, I fear I would be unable to take a breath. This is where the clouds come down to sleep. So each one of those panels was a different part of the day. So at the beginning, obviously, it was morning, and then by the end, in the foggy kind of tree graveyard looking place, it was nighttime. So as we turn the page, we see day 4 starts. And we see finally Woodrue has made it to what looks like the entrance of this structure Swamp Thing has built. So as Woodrue stands there, not quite knowing what to do, he's just looking up at the doorway and the steps that go to it. His narration says, Day 4. I make a friend. And we see a woman come out from behind some bushes, and she walks over to Woodrue and says, Hey, where the hell do you think you're going? You can't go in there. Are you out of your mind? That's where he lives. And without really paying attention to her, Woodrue says, I know. That's why I'm here. I've come to pay the swamp god a visit. I really need to talk to him. And the woman replies, Jesus, sure, we'd all like to talk to him, but the Swamp Thing isn't someone who takes kindly to being disturbed, you know? He built this place so he could be alone. He doesn't appreciate human company. But not really paying attention to her, Woodrue just begins to walk up the steps and he says, Fine, then he should be pleased to see me. And then the woman says, Listen, if you do get to see him, could you deliver a message? Could you tell him he changed my life forever, and I'll always be grateful for that? My name is Connie. I used to be president of a multinational corporation, but meeting him inspired me to leave it all behind. Will you tell him that for me? Tell him Connie loves him. Connie Sunderland. And wow, that is quite a reveal. It has been some time since we saw Connie Sunderland. The last time we saw her was the end of the Nancy Collins run, where she was evil and was indeed trying to help out Anton Arcane unknowingly take over the world by using Tefe to build him a new human body. And once again, that's in the Nancy Collins run if you want to know any of this stuff. So definitely go check out those issues I did before. Then we turn the page and we cut to Abby Arcane, who is sitting in her living room eating ice cream out of a container and watching the TV. And she's watching some movie that she's very engrossed in because she's saying, "Son of a bitch, don't trust him, Mia. You were crazy enough to trust Woody with the kids, right? Then look at what happened. Oh God, you're just too nice for your own good sometimes." And I don't know what show or movie she's watching, but she's very engrossed in it. And as she scrapes the bottom of her ice cream container, the picture on the TV becomes to be scrambled, and the audio also begins to become scrambled. Then the room becomes completely silent and also black and white, and suddenly 4 men are standing around her as she sits at her couch, and one of them says, "Miss Cable." But like I said, all of a sudden, all the sound went out of the room as well, so it seems like she can't talk or anything. And I should say all of these men are wearing black suits and black fedoras, and the man who said Miss Cable takes his off and he says, "Do not be alarmed. Good evening and pardon our sudden, that is to say, startling appearance. We hope you will greet us warmly, hotly, extending the hand of friendship. We mean you no harm. Hello." And then he looks down at the ice cream container and he says, "Please, finish your supper. I will do the talking. Not much of a speaker. Not anymore, but bear with me. No giggles. No giggles. You should find what I have to say most interesting. Very much remarkable indeed. National security needs your help, Miss Cable." And then he gets very close to her face and he says, "Your former sexual mate, oh dear, that is to say, the Swamp Thing, has become a recluse, a hermit, a menace to society, oh yes. Our intelligence reports suggest, that is to say, no, for sure, he plans to destroy the world, and we must do what we can to stop him. No questions asked." Then he stands up straight again and he continues, "We think, correction, know for certain, your child has been trained to help him. Tefe is not human. Feel no remorse as she feels none for you. Our best people, top men, they're already planning to attack, kill the monsters, but we must eliminate every possible avenue of escape." Then he pulls out a card and he hands it to Abby and he says, "Call us if you hear anything. Oh, and enjoy the rest of the film." And Abby just looks like she's freaked out and doesn't really know what to do. And then as quickly as they appeared, the room becomes colored again and the men are gone. And Abby is left sitting there watching the TV, but then she pulls up the card to look at it, and as she reads what's on it, she says, "Jesus." And then we get a shot of what it says, and on it is the name Agent Casey, and then it has a telephone fax number that is all zeros. So there's literally no information on this card. There's also a symbol on it that is a triangle with a star on top of it, but I do not know the significance of that because I've never seen that symbol that I can remember. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Jason Woodrue, who it seems has been walking around in this Swamp Thing palace for at least a day because it says now day 6. So we spent all of day 5, I guess, wandering around trying to find Swamp Thing with no luck. So in day 6, we're seeing panels of him walking through what look like completely different climates, almost like he's going on a world tour. We're seeing him walk through a tropical rainforest, snow-covered mountain peaks, and also a desert area that is basically a full replica of ancient Egypt. And over these panels, Woodrue's narration says, "Day 6. There has been a certain amount of speculation about the swamp god's appearance since he went into hiding a year ago. It has been known to vary over the years, but recent reports have been somewhat dramatic and curiously inconsistent. Some eyewitnesses claim to have seen a vague misty creature haunting the southern wetlands on a number of occasions. Others suggest he has become a water spirit, assuming the form of friendly faces and luring wayward children to their deaths. Perhaps the most interesting of all are the blurred black and white photographs of him levitating around the perimeter of the palace, shown to me by a nervous young man with a Down syndrome baby. There's so much to learn about the new abilities he's discovered, and so little time before we believe he will act." Pausing for a moment and reflecting upon these facts, looking at the mission I volunteered to undertake, I would almost question my sanity did I not have a signed certificate from Arkham Asylum proving that I am of a sound and healthy state of mind. Feeling a little more insured, I continue my climb. Then we turn the page and it says Day 7, and the narration says, I reach the summit, and we see Woodrue is ascending a long set of stairs, and the stairway is almost Tolkien, like there's trees all along the side of it, and their branches form an archway above it. And as Woodrue climbs, he hears in his head, Hello, Woodrue. And upon hearing this voice, Woodrue sheepishly says, Hello? Is that you, Master? I can hear your voice, but I can't see where it's coming from. It's almost as if you're in my mind. This situation is very strange indeed. And Swamp Thing answers back in his head, I'm speaking to you without my mouth, Woodrue. I no longer need to be shackled by words. The alphabet is a clumsy construction of mankind, created to divide. This will be a purer form of communication. And Woodrue replies, Forgive me, but I do not understand, Master. Where are you? Have you assumed a new physical form? And at this point, Woodrue has got to the top of the steps, and there's nothing there. He's just talking to the air in the room. But then Swamp Thing's voice says, You would not recognize me, little Woodrue. My use of the human form has passed, but perhaps you would find it easier to speak with me if I could more closely resemble your own size and weight. And Woodrue replies, Oh, yes, please, Master. I would very much like that. So Swamp Thing begins to build a body, and he says in Woodrue's head, Very well. Now, let's begin a conversation. And Swamp Thing has built a body we've never seen him in before. It looks like it's made of white driftwood, kind of like beech wood that's been bleached by the sun. And it is still like kind of human shaped. He still has a head and arms and legs and a torso, but there are a lot of white branches coming off of him. And curiously, he's wearing a purple robe that is being held by a pin that is made of solid gold on his chest. And in my mind, I'm not sure if this is 100% true or not, but his aesthetic definitely reminds me of what a Roman Caesar looks like. So Swamp Thing builds himself a throne and he sits down, and some more stairs appear between him and Woodrue. So Woodrue begins to climb them on his hands and knees, and he says to Swamp Thing beggingly, I have come on behalf of man's world, Master. Their ignorance and fear of evolution has led them to believe you seek to replace humanity with a new dominant species. Certain authorities intend to halt your plans any way they can, but I suggested it might be more civilized to speak with you first. Will you assure me their theories are incorrect? And Swamp Thing answers, No, little Woodrue. I am afraid I cannot. And Woodrue says, I urge you to reconsider, sir. Your impatience with mankind is understandable, but need I remind you of the facts you once delivered to me about the careful balance of the ecosystem? The plant kingdom will be under threat if you removed all of animal life. And Swamp Thing stands up, and he looks pretty terrifying as he does this. His mouth is completely gone as well, so he's just staring intently at Woodrue, and he says, I shall create a new, more colorful and splendid ecosystem from the many elements at my finger. Current kingdoms are tired concepts now, and I think it would be best if they were laid to rest. No fish will swim in the seas I create. No fruit will hang from the trees. I want to build a new world you have no place in, Woodrue. You, or any of your half-human kind. And to this, almost grovelingly, Woodrue crawls closer to the robes that Swamp Thing is wearing, and now Swamp Thing is hovering above him terrifyingly. And Woodrue says, Forgive my asking, but who shall inherit this Earth, Master? Will it be the new race they say you've been preparing, or is there worse news yet to come? And in front of Swamp Thing, we get some little round orbs, and in one of those orbs, we see the face of the woman who was talking to Jim Rook at the end of the Trial of the Vapors arc. And as Swamp Thing looks at her image, he says, The first of a new, more intelligent species is currently gestating within the womb of a virgin in Manhattan, little Woodrue. This human does not yet recognize her significance in what lies ahead. I grow impatient waiting for the utopia I have promised in the wake of my apocalypse. I would do it now without a moment's hesitation, were I not awaiting the trial of the Parliament of Flames. Only then will the whole earth truly be under my control. And as he says this, the stairs begin to rip apart, and Woodrue begins to float away on the one he stands on. And I guess probably because it's all wobbly, he gets down on his knees and he begins to hold onto the sides of it so he doesn't fall, and he yells to Swamp Thing as he flies away, "Tell me, Master, why have you built this wonderful home? It's very beautiful, but I would imagine concepts such as beauty and ugliness have no place in your new level of comprehension." And Swamp Thing answers, "The palace shall house those I intend to replace humanity. This is where they shall live, and I shall cater to their every need. Already my kingdom stretches for 20 miles in every direction, enchanting the swamp and those humans foolish enough to believe that they might flatter me. But in time, it will reach out and cover the four corners of the earth itself. This is how the world will look when I pass the final trial. Now, let me answer the question you have not dared to ask, little Woodrue. Let me show you what I have become, so that you might prepare the world." And then Swamp Thing's hand reaches out around Woodrue's head, and then we turn the page and we cut back to New York City. And we see John Constantine talking to the Phantom Stranger on a sidewalk corner, and he's saying, "Everybody and their dog knows about New York's 7 routes to the underworld. But this is the first time I've ever laid eyes on the alleyway that takes you straight to the word. I reckon I better brush up on my occult atlas, eh? I mean, who knows what trouble a gullible tourist like me could end up in if he walks down the wrong street. The Big Apple's a dodgy place, isn't it?" Then he pulls out a cigarette from his jacket and he lights it, and the Phantom Stranger says, "Perhaps your time would be better spent preparing for your own role in this plot, John Constantine. The Ravenwind Witch is already laying the groundwork for his invocation of Anton Arcane." And John replies, "Nice work if you can get it. I'm stuck with finding a box of fairy tale blood wishing matches, ain't I? El Senior Blake is gonna love this one." And then he holds out a cigarette to the Phantom Stranger and says, "Fancy a last ciggy before you take the plunge?" And Phantom Stranger replies, "No, thank you. I refuse to follow these fashionable new trends." And then he begins to walk down the alley away from John, and John says to him, "Don't forget to send a postcard." And the Phantom Stranger replies, "It's true what they say about you, John Constantine. You really do grow more immature with age." And as John lights another cigarette, he says, "Yeah, so I'm told. Good luck with the word, mate. Rather you than me." Then we turn the page and we see the Phantom Stranger appear in a snow-covered area, and there's nothing around except rocks and snow and wind. And as the Phantom Stranger looks around, he says out loud, "I did not come here to address the spirit of hatred or the spirit of love. I wish instead to see him who was formed when the voice who described all things opened his mouth and sang the universe into existence. I seek an audience with the word." And then the Phantom Stranger does something I've never seen him do. He takes his hat off, I guess in respect, and he bows his gray head. And in front of the Phantom Stranger as he waits is a big mountaintop, and all of a sudden we see a hand appear on the top of that mountaintop, and it's covered by a red glove, and then we see the rest of the body of the Word appear, and he looks just like he did before, except he's gigantic now. And if you don't remember what he looked like before, he is a male-shaped being with ivory skin, and around his body is a red cloak and hood, and he has red gloves on. He kind of looks like a red version of the Spectre. And as the Word looks down from the mountaintops, he says, "State your purpose here, stranger." And Phantom Stranger puts his hat back on and he looks up at him and he says, "The mind which was Alec Holland has risen to dangerous levels, hooded man. Although you were distracted from his destruction before, I believe the time has come for you to awaken from your slumber. You must do your duty and protect the reputation of your god." And the Word replies, "Meaning?" And Phantom Stranger says, "It's time to go to work." Then we cut back to the swamps where Jason Woodrue is running naked, and it now says day 14. So apparently he was so terrified by Swamp Thing, he just ran continuously for 7 days back through the swamp, ripping off all the clothes he had. And as he gets back to the camp, one of the guards sees him and says, "Look, there he is ahead. Jesus Christ, look at the state of him. Somebody go find a paramedic, pronto. Woodrue?" And then Woodrue rushes into the center of camp and collapses, and a bunch more soldiers run up to him, and one of them says, Jesus, Woodrue, are you okay? You've been gone for 2 weeks. We'd almost given you up for dead. And then another soldier rushes up and says, what happened in there? Did you speak to it? And Woodrue answers, I spoke to him. He told me everything. He told me what he's become and, oh God, I never dreamed he was so powerful. And then he begins to mutter to himself under his breath, he's turned his back on everything. The swamp god isn't even a human shape anymore. He's trained himself to be accustomed to a non-human form. And the soldier yells out, a blanket! We need a blanket here, move it! And as they throw blankets over Woodrue, the soldier says, don't try to talk, Woodrue. Save your strength. And Woodrue replies, what's the point? There's nothing to save it for. There's no future. No nothing. You see, I haven't told you the worst part. I haven't told you what the castle really is. Oh God, it's him. Don't you understand? He's assumed the form of this whole kingdom, and he's getting bigger every day. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So quite a kickoff for this last epic story arc of Swamp Thing Volume 2. So if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.